Hello, my name is Carolyn McCarthy, and I'm thrilled to be celebrating Earth Month here at Lowell Media Center for the Lowellian. I am joined here with Mary Wambui-Ekop, whose work is very practical, it's action-based, it can be measured, and it's very local. And we're going to be having a conversation today whose emphasis is basically we care about people and the planet. We seek to protect it in ways that feel practical, in ways that use our expertise, and in a way that we feel like we have impact. So I hope that you enjoy the conversation today. I've had a lot of Earth Day conversations in past years that start sometimes with the climate science. We give the whole, all of the data around causes, impacts, and maybe solutions for climate change. Sometimes we talk about climate justice. Sometimes the conversation veers towards recycling. We don't have time today to give a full kind of introduction to climate change or what some of the impacts here are in Lowell. And because of that, we are going to make a few assumptions in this conversation about some facts, some shared beliefs that we have, some shared values, some shared definitions, and maybe even some shared assumptions. So let's start there before we get into our discussion. So our first definition is climate change. Climate change refers to how human behavior, specifically the burning of fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and gas, contribute to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which act as a blanket heating up the global average Earth's temperature, which has cascading impacts to very local levels. So that's our first definition. That's our first assumption, is that you are here with us on that. Our second is around climate justice. Now, climate justice recognizes that those who are most disproportionately impacted by climate change are those who historically are not those who are responsible for causing climate change. So we're talking specifically about low-income communities and also communities of color, not only around the globe, but also within communities and within cities. For example, our city here in Lowell. So there's our climate justice. And I think the last thing that I want to say is that it's an interesting place to be hosting a conversation about climate change because we are here in Lowell, Massachusetts, and it was the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution. And with that history also brings us to today, where we are a gateway city. So Mary, will you please introduce yourself, maybe talk a little bit about your work at the state level, and maybe you could talk about something that's recent or a current issue that you're particularly involved in.
So thank you very much, Caroline, for having this conversation with me. So my name is Mary Wambui-Ekop, as Carolyn said. I am a Greg Torres Fellow at Mass Inc. I also work for the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston as an asset manager working at the intersection of housing and climate. I also represent residential consumers across Massachusetts at the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council. I co-chair its Equity Working Group, and I am also in the Grid Modernizations Advisory Council Equity Working Group. And yeah, that's what I do. Climate, housing, family, anything.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And is there something that you're really in the weeds with right now?
So 2024 is a pivotal year for Massachusetts and Lowell, basically. So there are decisions that will need to be made that relate to climate. Specifically, I'm working on the National Grid rate case, which will be decided upon by the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. It's about basically increasing electricity rates. Lowell is in the National Grid territory. To understand the scale, they're requesting permission to spend approximately $1.4 billion per year for the next 5 years. And to put this into context, they just spent $400 million in capital expenses in 2023. So this proposed spending is going to triple the current levels of spending. And that spending is going to come out of the pockets of ratepayers in a city like Lowell, where many people are energy burdened. And this matters because for us to meet our climate goals, we need to decarbonize or electrify. So for electrification to happen, we need to spend on the grid, but we also need to have fuel switching, but we also need to decide who pays and what do they get after paying. So that's a decision that's going to be given by the DPU in the next couple of months. And I'm working as a community advocate, representing the voices of many, making a couple of demands, such as making sure there's an equity component and making sure that already burdened residents don't get more burdened by energy expenses. 2024 is also the year when Massachusetts' 3-year energy efficiency and decarbonization plan for 2025 to 2027 gets completed. So there's been a lot of public processes. Tomorrow there'll be a listening session. And this matters to local Lowell residents because historically, Lowell households have not participated as they should. They have been underserved by this energy efficiency program, which is supposed to prepare people for heat pump adoption. It's supposed to prepare people for, increased good indoor air quality, a lot of environmental benefits. So the last time we had a plan, we planned, that was 2022 to 2024, myself and many other people were able to push for increased funding for cities like Lowell, which have now have the opportunity to have their own energy advocate. A shout out to Victor, who's the energy advocate for the city of Lowell. And he's able to put people, to link people up with energy efficiency and decarbonization measures. So that's another thing I'm working on. And then lastly, there was an energy affordability inquiry begun by the Department of Public Utilities on January 4th. So there's been a process of collecting data to think about the future of energy costs in the Commonwealth. So those are some of the things I'm working on.
Okay.
Yeah.
For those at home, and Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like in Massachusetts, there's generally a push for households to switch from gas for heating or for operating stoves towards a heat pump, which is run with electricity. And the benefits there are not only that we have less fossil fuels burning through the gas, depending on where that electricity comes from, right, for the heat pump, but also that there are indoor air quality measures or improvements that could come from that type of switch. And what you're hoping to do is to make sure that the ways in which these programs are implemented are getting folks involved who historically have not been involved in perhaps creating some type of intentional focus on helping renters, you were mentioning, in lower income households be able to afford that switch over or to be able to afford increased rates from National Grid. Is that right?
Yes, what I'm really advocating for is that, one, there should be an intentional focus on the issue of energy affordability. While we have pushed a lot of climate policies and governors have thankfully signed great and awesome policies, beginning with the Green Communities Act and the act to, I'm forgetting its name, but I think it was in 2022, these policies did not focus on the role of energy affordability in the phasing out of fossil fuels. And so it's been great to say we want to switch from fossil fuels. But as far as having a very practical path towards making this switch happen, especially for households that are heating with gas, switching to heat pumps, there wasn't much thought about that. Gas is cheap and electricity is expensive. Mm-hmm. So if you have households in places like Lowell who are paying up to 14% of their annual incomes towards energy, they are already facing a crisis, and that's gas. Mm-hmm. So when we switch, as per the climate mandates, we will be laying a burden on these households for climate decisions that we made on their behalf and did not create a path suitable for them to switch. And that's what I'm fighting for. I'd like the Commonwealth to rethink energy rates. Mm-hmm. And the rates that should be pushed forward are those that support decarbonization and those that support the well-being, economic well-being of low-income households. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you mentioned Massachusetts state level. I know that you were also involved with the Lowell Forward 2040 here. And I'm wondering if you would be able to talk a little bit about what your experience was during that process. Could you first talk about, well, maybe first, why is it important for cities and towns to have these plans when they're also somewhat reliant on movement that's happening at the state level? So how is your process working with Lowell Forward? Maybe what were the specific areas that you were involved in? And why is it important that Lowell has something like this?
So I'll first begin by saying why cities need to be very intentional about climate action. Every city is like a household. Each house is different. The way each family makes their decisions is different. And they can have the same $1,000, but the way they select the things that they will do with that money is different. And that's what has been happening as far as climate actions is concerned. While we may have like a statewide policy, each city decides what's important. That's why you have in Massachusetts, cities like Boston are like at the forefront nationally of climate action and resilience planning. And then you come to Lowell, while we've done a little bit, we are not at the same level because we have to make intentional decisions on how to run our own house. So that's why I think cities need to be very intentional, and climate action should actually be local. So as far as Lowell Forward, I've lived in Lowell for 21 years. I was surprised that there was planning that happened a few years ago. I did not know it happened. But Lowell Forward was different. I knew. I participated. So I believe that the city of Lowell did something different this time with the Lowell Forward plan. They were intentional about including all communities. They had surveys, they had workshops, and they did an awesome thing. They hired a local community organizer. Her name is Mercy, and almost everyone in Lowell knows her. So that was something that I found really interesting about the Lowell Forward plan. The other thing is that it's one thing to participate or be involved, and then it's another thing to actually see your influence in the plan. Because most of the time, people participate everywhere. They'll say we had all stakeholders. But as far as reflecting the voice of stakeholders in the final document, it never happens. I participated in the energy and climate section of the Lowell Forward plan. And I can see my voice there. I can see some of the things people I know that participated, proposed, are in the plan. So that's what was different. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're talking about the Lowell Forward 2040, which is Lowell's comprehensive master plan that allows a vision for the city and a pathway forward into the future. And you are saying that the process was very inclusive and that you saw your ideas represented in this final document. How could this process continue in a way that perhaps we have the ideas recommended in the document? Where does it go from here with implementation, and how do we keep making sure that we are beholden to those beautiful ideas that were written down?
Yeah, one of the obvious things is to fund what the city said it wants to see.
To fund it.
Or what
Yes.
the community members have proposed.
Right.
The other thing is that there should be a framework that consists of community members that assess whether what was proposed is actually done. There should be a monitoring plan, and that monitoring plan should include residents. Because it's one thing to have a plan, it's another to implement it. And sometimes when you're in the thick of implementing a plan, things change. Sometimes cities just continue. They don't go back to the community members and say, oh, wait a minute, something has changed. How should we do this? Or what would you like to see? So that type of continued engagement with community members as the plan is being implemented is going to make the plan successful. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I wanted to take a moment talking about planning and implementation. There is a project that is already underway in Lowell. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's called Lowell Inc., or the Lowell Innovation Network Corridor. And it is being led by UMass Lowell in partnership with the city. And basically, this plan is going to open up the Wanalancet building, which used to be UMass Lowell's buildings before, to private industry and companies. And a lot of folks in the community are really excited about it because it seems to be benefiting Lowell and those companies who are coming in, and also the university in a number of ways. So now the university has opportunities for their students to have real hands-on experience and internships, right? The companies are benefiting because they now have this fresh talent and access to a lot of these university grants from the state. So they appreciate that. And the city of Lowell benefits in that these buildings that used to be run by UMass Lowell and are now going to have private companies and therefore are going to be taxed. So Governor Maura Healey said that the project will generate $3.7 billion in economic activity, ultimately create 2,000 permanent jobs, and it will also approximately build 500 housing units that will be smaller type housing designed for young professionals. I'm wondering if you have any first thoughts hearing some of these points about the project, or also what are some maybe questions that are coming to mind?
So I just really want to thank you because you made me really aware of this Lowell Inc. project. And obviously, it's exciting. It's good to, have new life, especially when it comes to taxes. Lowell is a gateway city. It needs this tax revenue. But I think we can do this even better if we asked ourselves, how will the 18% residents of Lowell that are below the poverty line benefit from this proposed initiative? And then we can ask ourselves, what about the 30% or so foreign-born residents of Lowell that are language isolated? How will they benefit? So Lowell Inc. is a great idea. Any project that will breathe new life in Lowell is welcome. However, there are some questions that we should ask ourselves. For instance, there's an 18% of residents in Lowell living below poverty line. How will they benefit from Lowell Inc.? What about the 30% foreign-born residents who may be language isolated? How will they benefit? And what does this mean for renters that are 56% here in Lowell? So these are questions that we need to ask ourselves. And for any city that is thinking about economic development should not be leaving anyone behind. And it's not just in terms of benefit, but also in terms of process. When this great and awesome plan was thought about, were there any renters involved? Were there any foreign-born residents? Were there any low-income households involved? And maybe, they may not have been involved then, but I hope that they will be involved because the city belongs to everyone. It doesn't belong to just a section of the plan. And as far as Lowell Inc., I would even dare say, maybe we need to think about in the final stages of maybe the negotiations, we need to ask ourselves how many of these 2,000 jobs will be held by Lowell residents? How many business contracts that are part of this process will be held by Lowell residents representing the demographics of the city of Lowell? And when it comes to climate, will any of these investments benefit our parks? In fact, maybe some of that money should be used to establish a fund, like a fund that was established in Fitchburg at the peak of the energy utility bills crisis last year. It was a mayor-city fund that was helping residents with their utility bills. So I think maybe as far as climate is concerned, it would be good to think about establishing such a fund and facilitating the fuel switching of households that are heating with gas to heat pumps in the city of Lowell. Pick a part in Lowell and say, these are 1,000 households, this is our climate commitment, and this is the benefit we get from Lowell Inc. So those would be my thoughts.
So you're saying not only that you hope that as the process continues, and it's been going very quickly, that it include more of low-income renters, low-income households, for example. But not only that in the process, but you even see perhaps with those tax dollars that are generated every year that there could be an establishment of a fund that particularly addresses or benefits those who may have difficulties with making those switches that we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation to make their energy costs more affordable to them. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. That's economic development to
right.
me, yeah. Right. And it's economic development that's in line with Earth Month climate, yeah.
So zooming out a little bit, in your experience, how are cities and communities having conversations around climate change?
Cities are having conversations around climate change the same way as Lowell during planning. When we were planning in the Lowell Forward process, conversations around climate showed up, and I believe other cities across the country are doing the same. They are also having conversations around noticing changes in the weather, like more rain and less snow. When they look at their budgets, snow removal is not maybe as high as it has always been. And then there are conversations that are triggered by events like the solar eclipse, There was just no way that people were not going to talk about climate then. So And these are some of the ways that cities are talking about climate. Yeah.
I wanted to take a moment because you received the Gateway Cities Champion Award for advancing clean energy efforts in an equitable manner in 2023. And I wanted to ask you, what were your thoughts on receiving the award?
So the award was very humbling because it put a spotlight on cities that I really care about. The cities host a lot of immigrants like myself. They also host a lot of BIPOC households, low-income households, renters, and many of them are, having economic challenges. And receiving that award recognizes that there's opportunity in the clean energy economy for cities like Lowell. So that really got me excited.
What are some policies at a larger level that you feel people should be aware of right now and tuned into in some capacity?
Any policy that has to do with phasing out of fossil fuels is something that cities and people should be, very involved in or watching out for. This is because there is an environmental opportunity and there's also an economic opportunity. So, something else that people should be watching out for are Public Utility Commission's hearings. In Massachusetts, we call it the Department of Public Utilities. Those hearings matter, and while they seem like really boring because of very technical language, there's a lot that's happening right now in the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities that's trying to bring in local, regular folks who are not lawyers or energy experts into the space of understanding what really happens with utilities. And utilities are special because they are in the fossil fuel business and they are part of our path out of the fossil fuel economy. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, with all of the work that you're doing, you sound like you're very busy. I'm wondering, what are some of your greatest resources or supports that enable you to move forward in the work that you're doing, whether those resources are actual funding sources, if it's some type of capacity or partnership or relationship?
Yeah, I should say my husband, my family, my church community. It is a lot of work, especially having to change policies and things like those. Then there's also organizations like Mass Inc., which have awarded me resources by being a Greg Torres Fellow. And the Planning Office for Urban Affairs, where I work, small team but mighty in housing and climate issues. And then there's also the general community. Lowell has a group of very active climate warriors. So, yeah.
We have the normal brand of Lowell pride, and then we have those who are in the climate field with a lot of pride related to that. I can agree with you on that. We do have that. Yeah. I have one last question for you. It may be an easy question or a hard question for you to answer. If you had a magic wand and you could change anything, what would be the one thing that you would change?
Funding.
Okay.
I would make sure that there is the relevant funding to decarbonize. Otherwise, our climate goals are just goals with nothing behind them.
It seems like tonight we've talked about not only the planning and the processes that go into envisioning a future at these larger levels, but more specifically these local municipalities. But now we're talking about funding and how to implement all of these beautiful goals. So that sounds really important. I'd like to bring us to a close. I think this is all of the time that we have for tonight, but I wanted to thank you again. We're here with Mary Wambui-Ekop. My name is Carolyn McCarthy, and this has been the Lowellian. Thank you so much, Mary, for having this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you.